It was early morning when the explorer began his walk into the forest. The sky was still pale and the air smelled of rain and soil. He had always liked going where most people never bothered to go. Old buildings, forgotten paths, quiet lakes. Those were the places that made him feel alive. That day he wanted to go deeper than usual. He had seen something strange on an old satellite map. A patch of flat land surrounded by nothing but trees. No roads, no rivers, no sign of any village. Just a wide, empty space that made no sense in the middle of thick forest. That was enough reason for him to go and see it for himself. He packed his small bag with water, a flashlight, a camera, and a few energy bars. The ground was soft from last night's rain, and every step made a quiet crunch. Birds sang somewhere high up, but other than that it was just the wind and his steady breathing. For hours he walked without seeing anything special, just trees and moss and the occasional fallen trunk. Still, something about the place felt different. The deeper he went, the quieter it became. Even the birds had stopped singing. He paused to take a sip of water, glancing around. The forest floor started to change. The soil wasn't as uneven anymore. It looked strangely level, almost like a road had once been there but had long since disappeared under years of growth. He crouched down and touched the ground. Beneath the thin layer of dirt and leaves, something solid pressed back. Metal. At first he thought it was some old machinery or maybe a buried pipe, but as he walked further, the ground had the same feel, stretching wide under his boots. He frowned, brushing away more dirt. The more he uncovered, the more it looked like painted steel, white, chipped, and rusted. He followed the faint metallic path for a while, not sure where it would lead. Then all at once the trees started to thin out. Sunlight broke through in long, bright lines. He took another few steps forward and then stopped. His heart jumped in his chest. There, between the trees, stood something huge. It was white, curved, and towering above the forest floor. He blinked, thinking his eyes were playing tricks on him. But no, it was real. He walked closer, pushing through tall weeds and broken branches. The shape became clearer. It wasn't a wall. It wasn't a building. It was the bow of a ship. He stood there for several minutes, too stunned to move. The front of the vessel rose out of the ground like a sleeping giant, its paint peeling, the name almost worn away. The words were hard to read, but he could make out a few faded letters across the side. The rest was lost to time. The ship's massive body stretched far back into the forest, disappearing into the trees. It looked like it had been there for decades. His mind raced. How could a cruise ship, an enormous ocean vessel, be sitting in the middle of a forest hundreds of miles from any sea? He rubbed his eyes, trying to find some explanation. Maybe it was part of an old movie set. Maybe it was built for training or some project. But the rust and overgrowth told a different story. It looked abandoned, forgotten. He pulled out his camera and began recording. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke, not out of fear but disbelief. He filmed the edges of the ship, the tangled roots crawling up its side, the vines climbing across broken railings. It was like nature had decided to take it back piece by piece. After circling the ship for a while, he found what looked like a stairway leading up toward a deck entrance. Most of the steps were broken, and a few were buried under dirt. He hesitated before climbing. The metal groaned softly under his weight, echoing in the quiet. When he reached the top, he tried one of the doors. It was stuck at first, but with a strong push it opened. The smell that came out was thick and musty, like old wood and rainwater trapped for years. Dust floated in the air like fog. He stepped inside and shone his flashlight across the floor. Chairs were scattered around. A few tables were still standing, though covered in dirt and leaves that must have blown in through broken windows. It looked like time had simply stopped there. He moved carefully through the corridor, his footsteps slow and quiet. Old posters still hung on the walls, bright smiles of passengers on a sunny deck, drinks in hand, enjoying a trip that probably never finished. He stopped in front of one of them, brushing the dust off with his sleeve. The date printed at the bottom was from the early 1990s. He kept walking, filming everything. The light from his flashlight caught bits of glass and metal, reflecting tiny flashes like stars. He could almost imagine what it might have been like years ago. Music playing, people laughing, waves crashing outside. Now it was only silence and the faint creak of metal shifting with the wind. At one point he reached what seemed to be a dining area. Plates were still set on a long table. A few cups lay on the floor. He crouched and picked one up. It was cracked but still whole. He turned it over, noticing the logo of the cruise company printed faintly on the bottom. He didn't recognize the name. That made it even stranger. As he explored, a thought began to grow in his mind. Maybe this place was never meant to be found. Maybe that's why no one had ever mentioned it. He had read about hidden towns, ghost villages, even underground bunkers, but never something like this. He continued to another part of the ship where the hallway grew darker. The air felt colder there and the smell stronger. His flashlight beam caught a broken door hanging off its hinges. On the floor lay an old backpack half covered in dust. He crouched again and opened it carefully. Inside were a few empty cans, a small flashlight, and some batteries. Someone had been there before him. Not years ago, recently. He straightened up, glancing down the corridor. His heart started to beat faster. He called out softly, just to check if anyone might still be around. No answer, only the echo of his own voice. He took a slow breath and kept walking. After another few minutes, he found a small staircase leading upward. He climbed carefully, the steps creaking under each move. At the top, he reached a wide deck where sunlight streamed through broken glass panels. From there, he could see the forest stretching endlessly in every direction. Trees surrounded the ship completely, their tops swaying gently in the wind. It looked both beautiful and haunting, a man-made giant lost in a green ocean of leaves. He stood there for a while, just watching. The sound of the wind brushing through the trees mixed with the faint metallic groans of the ship's structure. It felt unreal. He recorded a few clips describing what he saw. His voice was calm, but his hands shook slightly as he held the camera. Eventually, he made his way back down and out of the ship. He walked around it again, studying the hull. There were marks along the lower sides, scratches, dents, and strange patches of discoloration. He ran his fingers across them. The texture was rough, uneven. It didn't look like normal wear from the sea. It looked like impact damage. As the sun began to sink behind the trees, he decided to head back. He planned to return another day with better gear. He wanted to explore every room, every deck, and find out how something so massive could end up here. Before leaving, he turned for one last look. The light from the sunset hit the ship's side, painting it gold and orange. It almost looked alive again, as if remembering what it once was. He smiled slightly, both amazed and confused. He had no idea that this discovery would soon take over his thoughts completely. He didn't know that in the coming days, the ship's strange history would begin to unravel, pulling him deeper into a mystery that had been hidden for decades. For now, all he knew was that he had found something extraordinary, something that shouldn't exist where it did, yet somehow did. He took one final photo before disappearing back into the forest. The ship stood silent behind him, surrounded by trees, waiting for the world to notice it again. The next morning, the explorer woke up thinking about the ship. He couldn't get it out of his head. It had felt like something out of a dream, yet he had the photos and videos to prove it was real. He sat at his small desk, scrolling through the pictures on his camera. Every image looked stranger than the last. The metal walls covered in moss, the faded letters on the side, the dark halls that looked endless. It all made him more curious. He wanted to know how it got there, why no one ever talked about it, and what stories it held inside. He packed his bag again, this time with a bit more gear. He brought a better flashlight, a small tripod for his camera, and a notebook. He told himself he would take his time and record everything properly. It wasn't just a random discovery anymore. It felt like a mystery waiting to be solved. When he reached the forest again, the air felt heavier. The path he had taken yesterday was still marked by his footprints, but something about it felt different today. Maybe it was the silence. The wind was still, and even the usual rustle of leaves was missing. It was like the forest was holding its breath. He followed the same route until he reached the clearing. The ship stood exactly where he left it, tall and still, surrounded by endless green. Sunlight reflected weakly off its metal surface. From a distance, it looked like it didn't belong to this world. He took a deep breath and walked closer. The vines along the hull had shifted slightly overnight, as if they were slowly creeping further up. He ran his hand along the metal. It was cold. This time he decided to enter through a different doorway, one closer to the back of the ship. The metal door was jammed shut, so he had to push hard until it gave way with a loud groan. Inside, the air felt thick and stale. Dust filled his flashlight beam like tiny floating snow. The hallway was narrower here, the floor covered in fallen debris. He walked slowly, his steps echoing softly. The walls were lined with broken signs and peeling paint. At one point, he passed a set of stairs leading down but decided to save that for later. He wanted to explore the main deck first. He reached a large open room that looked like a lounge. The ceiling was partly collapsed, letting in beams of light that cut across the darkness. Old furniture was scattered everywhere. Some chairs were overturned, others still upright as if waiting for someone to sit. A cracked mirror on the far wall reflected his flashlight faintly, giving him a quick startle when he saw his own shadow moving. He paused to listen. There was no sound, only the faint creaking of the ship's metal. It was so quiet that his own breathing felt loud. He pulled out his camera and started recording again, describing what he saw in a calm voice. He focused on the details, the faded wallpaper, the empty glasses still sitting on the tables, the broken piano in the corner with keys missing. Everything looked frozen in time. As he explored deeper, he noticed small things that didn't fit. In one corner of the room, there was a modern water bottle. It was clean and not covered in dust. That meant someone had been there not long ago. He looked around more carefully, shining his light along the floor. A few footprints were visible in the dust, leading toward a corridor on the left. He followed them quietly, feeling a mix of curiosity and caution. The corridor led to a section of rooms that might have been passenger cabins. The doors were half open, revealing small spaces with bunk beds and old suitcases. Some of the beds still had blankets stiff with age. He peeked inside one room and saw a suitcase lying open with clothes inside, faded and torn. He wondered if someone had left in a hurry, or if this place had been abandoned mid-journey. He stopped at one door that was shut tight. The handle was rusted, but when he pushed, it creaked open slowly. Inside was a small room with a desk, a lamp, and a broken window. Papers were scattered on the floor. He knelt down and picked one up carefully. The writing was faint, but he could still read a few words. Lists of names, numbers, and what looked like schedules. Another paper mentioned something about an engine issue and temporary halt. He gathered a few pages and folded them into his notebook. Then he saw something that caught his attention. There was a small black logbook on the desk, covered in dust. He brushed it off and opened it. The first few pages were blank, but the later ones had neat handwriting. It talked about the ship's route, weather conditions, and mechanical problems. The last entry stopped abruptly after mentioning a storm. That was it. No final note, no explanation. He closed the logbook slowly. His mind raced again. How did a ship that once sailed the ocean end up buried in trees? He wanted to look for clues in the engine room. That might tell him more. He retraced his steps until he found the staircase that led down. The air grew colder as he descended. The steps were slippery, covered in rust. At the bottom, the flashlight beam revealed a long, narrow passage leading into darkness. He could hear dripping water somewhere ahead. The sound echoed softly. He moved carefully through the hallway until he reached a massive metal door that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. He tried the handle, it didn't move. After a few strong pushes, it gave a deep groan and shifted enough for him to squeeze through. Inside was the engine room. The space was huge, filled with rusted machinery and tangled pipes. His flashlight swept across the floor, showing thick layers of dust and a few puddles of water. The engines looked like they had been stripped or dismantled. Some parts were missing entirely. It felt more like a construction site that had been abandoned mid-work. He walked around slowly, studying everything. He found another sign that someone had been there, a lantern lying on its side, still new. That made his skin prickle. Someone had come down here not long ago. Maybe they were still nearby. He spoke quietly to his camera, his voice low but steady. He explained what he was seeing and how the ship seemed like it had been taken apart on purpose. He pointed out markings on the walls, spray-painted symbols and numbers. They looked official, like something used in a survey or a technical project. He paused when he noticed a small door at the back of the engine room. It was partly hidden behind metal crates. He moved them aside carefully and pushed the door open. It led into a narrow space that looked like a storage room. Old tools and equipment lay scattered on the floor. In one corner, he found a folded map covered in dust. He opened it carefully. It showed the outline of a coastline with a few red marks that looked like coordinates. The name printed at the top of the map matched the faded letters on the side of the ship. He stood there for a moment, staring at it. The map looked old but official. He took a picture of it and folded it back. Then he sat down on a nearby crate to catch his breath. The whole thing didn't make sense. It was like pieces of two different worlds had collided, an ocean ship and a forest that had never seen the sea. He stayed there for a while, listening to the faint hum of wind moving through broken vents. His flashlight began to flicker, reminding him that it was getting late. He decided it was time to leave before it got dark again. As he climbed back up, he kept glancing behind him. The place felt different now that he had seen so much of it. It wasn't just abandoned, it felt hidden, maybe even protected. When he finally stepped outside, the forest air felt fresh again. The light was dimming and the sky was turning orange. He took one last look at the massive structure towering between the trees. It looked even more mysterious in the fading light. On his way back, his thoughts wouldn't stop spinning. Someone had been inside that ship recently. There were new footprints, a lantern, a water bottle. The logbook, the maps, and the strange signs all pointed to something bigger. This was no random wreck. It was something deliberately kept away from the world. He promised himself he would dig deeper. He wanted to find out who had been there before him and what they were looking for. The truth might not be easy to find, but he was already too far in to turn back. As he reached the forest edge, he stopped and looked over his shoulder one more time. The ship stood quiet and still, half covered in shadow, its white sides glowing faintly under the setting sun. It didn't look abandoned anymore. It looked like it was watching, waiting. He walked away slowly, unaware that his discovery was about to attract attention far beyond what he could imagine. The explorer couldn't stop thinking about what he had found inside the ship. The papers, the logbook, the map, it all pointed towards something hidden, something that didn't belong in that forest. He spent half the night reading through his notes again, trying to make sense of it. The words engine issue, temporary halt, and storm kept repeating in his head. It didn't explain how the ship had ended up there, but it gave him a starting point. The next morning, he posted a few of the photos on his small exploration blog, careful not to give away the exact location. He wanted to see if anyone knew anything about a ship with that name. Within hours, the post started getting attention. A few people commented that they had heard stories about strange structures hidden deep in the woods, but no one had ever mentioned a ship. Someone claimed it might be part of an old government test site. Another said it was probably a fake or an art project. The explorer knew it wasn't fake. He had walked through it himself. He decided to go back again, but this time he wanted to bring better tools and record the trip more seriously. He charged his camera batteries, packed extra lights, gloves, and a portable charger. He also printed the satellite map again, marking a few points he hadn't explored yet. The walk through the forest felt shorter now that he knew the way. The air was colder than before, and the sound of leaves under his boots echoed softly. When he reached the clearing, the massive ship stood exactly as before, calm and silent. He took a few minutes to circle around it, checking for new footprints or signs of anyone else. Everything looked undisturbed. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't the only one who knew about this place. He climbed up through the same doorway and switched on his flashlight. The familiar smell of rust and dampness greeted him again. This time he went straight toward the upper levels. The staircase creaked under his weight, but it held. At the top, he found a hallway leading to what seemed like the captain's quarters or control room. The walls there were covered with switches, gauges, and old maps. A large cracked window looked out over the forest canopy. He brushed away some dust from one of the control panels. It was covered in labels and buttons that no longer worked. The labels were written in faded letters that hinted at old technology. He turned slowly, taking everything in. On the table behind him, he noticed a small metal box half buried under a pile of papers. When he opened it, he found more documents. Weather reports, route charts, and a few typed pages stamped with something official-looking. The papers mentioned a test route and emergency relocation, but many lines were blacked out as if someone had tried to hide the details. He placed the papers in his bag and continued exploring. The next door he opened led to a room that looked like an office. A few chairs lay overturned and a typewriter sat quietly on a desk. When he pressed a key, the sound echoed across the empty room. It felt strange to touch something that hadn't been used in decades. He pulled out his notebook and wrote down everything he noticed. The ship seemed divided into sections that looked too structured for normal passenger use. There were too many control rooms, too few cabins. It was as if it had been converted for something else, something more secret. He decided to return to the lower deck where he had seen the strange symbols painted on the walls. As he walked down, he kept his flashlight low, scanning for anything he had missed before. Near one of the walls, he spotted something he hadn't noticed the last time. A small square panel had been cut out and welded back into place. The metal around it was newer, less rusty. Someone had been working there long after the rest of the ship had been abandoned. He ran his hand along the edge of the panel, noticing a faint hum behind it. He pressed his ear close to the wall. It sounded like wind, but too steady to be natural. He marked the spot in his notebook to check later. Moving further into the ship, he reached a narrow stairway leading to what looked like a storage level. The air was thicker there and the smell stronger. His flashlight revealed shelves full of old crates. Some were broken open, revealing ropes, old tools, and a few rusted containers. He opened one carefully. It was filled with sealed cans of food, all expired decades ago. He spoke softly into his camera, describing everything. His voice stayed calm, but his words carried excitement. Every discovery made the mystery deeper. He found another map pinned to a wall, this one showing a large body of water connected to a small river. The red line drawn on it seemed to trace a path inland. It stopped exactly where the forest was now. That was impossible. The river wasn't anywhere near big enough to carry a ship this size. He started to suspect that maybe parts of the ship had been moved, not floated. When he climbed back toward the deck, the forest outside had turned gray with evening light. He sat down near the edge of the ship, thinking quietly. What if this wasn't an accident? What if it had been brought here for a reason? Maybe it had been part of an experiment or a relocation project that was later forgotten. He decided to send the coordinates to a friend he knew online who worked with satellite maps. He didn't tell him what the place was, only asked if there was anything strange visible in that region. A few hours later, when he got home, his friend called back, sounding confused. According to the maps, there was no structure in that area at all. Just forest. No building, no shadow, nothing. It was as if the ship didn't exist. That night, he couldn't sleep. He opened the photos on his laptop again, zooming into every corner. The ship looked solid and real in every frame. Yet, for some reason, it didn't show up on any satellite record. He checked older maps from the 1990s, even older ones from the 70s, but the land had always looked the same. He thought about the fresh footprints, the lantern, and the welded panel. Maybe the ship wasn't entirely forgotten. Maybe someone was still keeping an eye on it. He started researching the ship's partial name, the few faded letters he had seen on the hull. After hours of digging through maritime records, he found a possible match. A cruise liner that had gone missing in 1993. It had left port for a short tour and never returned. The news from that time said it was caught in a massive storm and declared lost at sea. No wreckage was ever found. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. The date matched the logbook entry. The storm, the engine failure, everything fit. But it was impossible for a lost ocean liner to appear miles inland. Still, every clue seemed to point toward that missing ship. He decided to share some of his findings online without revealing too much. The response was overwhelming. People started calling it the ghost ship of the forest. Some said it was proof of government cover-ups. Others claimed it was just a creative story. A few even accused him of editing fake photos. He didn't care what people thought. He knew what he saw. He just wanted the truth. Over the next few days, he planned to return again, but this time he wouldn't go alone. A few fellow explorers from nearby cities reached out, offering to join him. He agreed, thinking it would be safer and easier to investigate as a team. Before the next visit, he received another message from his friend who worked with satellite maps. The message was short. I checked again. Still no ship. But there's a small rectangular clearing that looks man-made, like the ground was flattened. Be careful. Those words stayed in his head. Flattened ground. Man-made. It meant someone had prepared the land for something. Maybe the ship had been taken apart and reassembled there. He packed his things again and sat quietly for a while, thinking about everything that had happened in the past few days. He had gone from being a curious explorer to uncovering what looked like a forgotten piece of history. The mystery had started to grow beyond him. That night, he stood by his window looking out at the dark sky. He wondered what kind of people had built such a massive vessel and why they would hide it so deep in the woods. He also wondered who else might be out there, still protecting whatever secret it carried. He didn't know it yet, but his discovery was beginning to attract more attention than he expected. Journalists, researchers, and local explorers were already talking about the strange story spreading online. Some planned to go find the ship themselves. Others warned people to stay away. The explorer didn't care about the noise. He just wanted answers. The ship had become part of his thoughts, part of his life. It was more than curiosity now. It was a promise he had made to himself. He would find out why it was there, no matter how strange the truth turned out to be. As he turned off the lights and tried to rest, his mind drifted back to that image, the giant cruise ship standing silently among the trees surrounded by mist and mystery. It waited there in the darkness, holding its secrets as if daring him to return. The explorer didn't waste time after finding the connection between the forest ship and the vessel that vanished in 1993. He had already agreed to meet a small group of fellow explorers who had contacted him after seeing his posts online. They all shared the same curiosity, though none of them fully believed the story until they saw the pictures. They planned to visit the site together that weekend. The morning of the trip, the weather was cool and gray. The sky looked heavy with clouds and the air carried the smell of rain. The explorer packed extra flashlights, food, and a small first aid kit. He double-checked his batteries and camera gear. He had been there twice before, but this time felt different. It wasn't just about discovery anymore. It was about understanding. When they met near the edge of the forest, the others greeted him quietly. They spoke in low tones as if even before stepping into the woods they could already feel how strange the place was. After a short talk, they began their walk. The forest was as silent as ever. The only sounds were their footsteps and the occasional snap of branches. The explorer led the way, retracing the same path he had taken before. He noticed how easily he could now spot the landmarks: the fallen log, the oddly shaped tree, the faint clearing that told him they were close. When the ship finally appeared through the trees, the group stopped in their tracks. For a few seconds, no one said anything. Even though he had seen it twice before, the explorer still felt that rush of disbelief. The ship looked enormous and unreal, its rusted white sides rising like a wall among the trees. They walked closer slowly. One of the group members ran a hand along the metal hull, whispering something under his breath. Another took out a camera and started recording. The explorer stood back for a moment, watching their reactions. It felt good to see that he hadn't imagined it all. The ship was real, and now others could see it too. They climbed up the broken stairway and entered through the same doorway he had used before. Inside, the air was still cold and musty. The silence swallowed their voices as they spoke. The explorer guided them through the corridors, showing where he had found the logbook and the strange welded panel. He told them about the footprints, the lantern, and the fresh signs of someone being there. As they explored, they found new details he hadn't noticed. In one of the side rooms, they discovered several wooden crates stacked neatly in a corner. Most were empty, but a few still had rusted metal parts inside, pieces that looked like engine components or machinery. One of the explorers pointed out that the parts were labeled with codes that didn't match ship equipment. It was as if the vessel had been used to store or test something else. The explorer took pictures of the labels and markings. Everything about this ship felt out of place. The rooms were too structured, the crates too organized. It didn't look like a place abandoned in panic. It looked like something left behind intentionally. They reached the captain's room again, where he had found the metal box and blacked-out documents. He showed the others, and they carefully studied the pages. The weather reports and route charts still didn't explain much, but one of them noticed something odd: a small stamp on the corner of the paper with a code that looked military. None of them recognized it, but it didn't belong to any known cruise line. They continued exploring deeper, reaching an area none of them had entered before. It was darker there, with broken pipes hanging from the ceiling. The air smelled faintly of oil and metal. As they walked, they found a large door that looked sealed shut. The explorer tried pushing it, but it didn't move. Together they managed to force it open halfway. A stale gust of air rushed out, carrying the smell of dust and rust. Behind the door was a massive hall. It looked like a storage area or maybe a lower deck. Rows of metal beams ran along the ceiling, and the walls were lined with strange markings, numbers and symbols in faded paint. The floor was littered with small tools, metal rods, and fragments of wood. They spent nearly an hour inspecting the space. One of them noticed that the hall's walls were made of newer metal compared to the rest of the ship. It was as if this section had been rebuilt or added later. The explorer found it strange that a ship lost in the 90s could have parts that looked much newer. As they explored, the group's excitement grew. They filmed everything, talking softly about how unbelievable it was. Then one of them called out from the far corner of the room. They had found another door, smaller but clearly newer than the rest. It had a padlock, though it was rusted and weak. After some effort, they managed to break it open. Inside, they found something none of them expected. The small room was empty except for a metal table, a few boxes, and a single light fixture hanging from the ceiling. On the table lay stacks of old files and photographs. The explorer picked one up. The pictures showed the ship itself, but surrounded by construction cranes and heavy trucks. It was being moved. He looked through more of them. Some showed the ship in pieces, sections being transported on long vehicles. Others showed the same forest clearing from above, with workers and machines preparing the ground. It was proof that the ship hadn't just ended up there. It had been brought there piece by piece. The others stared in silence. It made no sense why anyone would go through so much trouble to move an entire cruise ship into a forest. The explorer flipped through the papers and found letters stamped with an old government seal. Most of the text had been blacked out, but one phrase was still visible: Simulation and Containment Program. He felt a chill run through him. He couldn't tell what the project was about, but the words sounded serious. Maybe the ship had been used for training or experiments that were later shut down. Whatever it was, someone had tried to erase it from records. They spent the rest of the day going through every paper they could find. The files were fragile and some had been eaten by dampness, but they gathered what they could. When evening came, they decided to leave. As they stepped outside, the wind had picked up and the sky was turning dark. The forest made soft, eerie sounds as the branches swayed. While walking back, none of them spoke for a while. The silence between them was heavy with thought. Everyone was processing what they had seen. Finally, one of them said quietly, "Maybe this place was never meant to be found." The words hung in the air like a warning. When they reached their vehicles, the explorer promised to scan the documents and share them with everyone. They agreed to keep the exact location private, at least for now. None of them wanted to attract unwanted attention. That night, the explorer stayed up late again. He looked through the photographs carefully. The details told a story that no one had ever shared. The ship had been moved inland deliberately. The pictures showed trucks carrying its sections, massive cranes lifting its hull, and workers assembling it like a puzzle in the forest. Then, after some time, the project stopped. The last photo showed the ship fully built and standing alone, surrounded by trees. No workers, no equipment, no explanation. He checked the documents again, searching for dates. The latest entry was from 1999. After that, nothing. The project must have been abandoned around then. Maybe it ran out of funding, or maybe it was shut down for reasons people weren't allowed to know. As he studied the last page, he noticed something else written in faded ink near the bottom corner. It was a single line: "All records to remain sealed indefinitely." That told him enough. Whatever the project was, it was never meant to be revealed. He leaned back in his chair, thinking about how much of history gets buried this way. Forgotten projects, secret operations, things left behind with no one to tell their stories. He felt both thrilled and uneasy. Finding the ship had started as an adventure, but now it felt heavier, more serious. He saved copies of all the photos and documents to an external drive, just in case. He didn't know who might come looking for them, but something told him this discovery wasn't going to stay quiet forever. The next few days, news began spreading online. Someone from the group had posted one of the photos without realizing it would go viral. People were talking about the forest cruise ship again, this time in larger numbers. Some thought it was a hoax. Others called it proof of a hidden government experiment. Reporters began reaching out, asking for interviews. The explorer ignored them all. He didn't want fame. He wanted truth. Still, he knew it was only a matter of time before someone else found the ship. As he sat by his window one night, he thought about going back one last time, alone. There was still one thing that bothered him: the welded panel with the faint humming sound behind it. He hadn't opened it yet. He felt like whatever was hidden there could explain everything. He didn't know that his final visit would reveal more than he expected, and that the ship still had one last secret left to tell.